It's afternoon, so we're going to get going. Thanks everyone for being here for our SOS seminar series. Today, we're very fortunate to have Professor Effie Kesidou here. She's visiting us for 10 days from the University of Leeds, working on some work with Nicole, who you see as one of the co-authors here. She's in the Department of Economics at Leeds, and she is an associate professor in applied economics. And she focuses on economics of innovation, which of course we love here at ASU, in particular the effective regulation and capabilities upon environmental innovations. And so I'm going to turn it over to Effie, and she'll share with you some of her research today, and then we'll have time to ask questions after, and we also have some snacks that are going to be inside back here after the talk if we want to hang around and talk to Effie about her work. So.
Hello, good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I would like to start by thanking Nicole for the invitation. It is really wonderful to be here with all of you today. This work is a joint work, as you can see with all the names, with Serdalo Zouzaglam from the University of Warwick, myself, of course, Nicole, and Konstantinos Iatridis from the University of Bath. Also, this work has received funding from the Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council. And into our topic. So this project focuses on standards, and in particular on multiple food standards. So here we introduce the notion of a situation where firms adopt many food standards, and we would like to examine whether firms that adopt a lot of standards perform better compared to firms that adopt less. Our empirical evidence is based from the apple industry in South Africa. So here is the structure of the presentation. I will start by introducing you to the research context, and then I will discuss our research problem. I will move then into theory and the conceptual framework. Then I will discuss the data and the methodology, and finally I will present you the results of our analysis, and I will conclude. So in this project, as I mentioned, was funded by the Biotechnology and Biology Research Council. We collaborated with biologists as they were co-investigators. Also, there were postdoctoral fellows. So very quickly, we realized that our context, that was agricultural production, is a very complex and knowledge-intensive. Just to give you an example, a producer needs to be aware of their crops, the health of their crops, but not only the current crops. They need to be aware of the future varieties of their crops, and therefore to be in collaboration with research and development that develop the new varieties, but also with marketing departments that they bring the information about consumer preferences of these future new varieties of crops. So producers they need to have a variety of knowledge about water, pest, weather conditions, new irrigation systems. At the same time, agricultural producers, they are under pressure to respond to increasing regulatory pressures, both nationally and internationally. So they need to maintain their environmental and social responsibility, but at the same time, they need to ensure that they are economically sustainable. So they need to also keep a focus on the production efficiency and on their exports. Now, moving into food standards. Food standards has been the focus of this project. Food standards are important in agricultural production because they are governance tools which allow producers to implement procedures and practices so as to control their impact upon the environment. So there are many standards, generic standards, sector-specific standards, institutional standards, private standards. And a key characteristic of standards is that they are typically visible to external stakeholders. And this is really important because external stakeholders, say buyers or consumers, they see the standard so they can make an informed decision, purchasing decision, whether they want to purchase a product from a sustainable producer. Okay, now I'm moving into, I haven't mentioned anything about that, about integrated pest management systems. Integrated pest management systems are not standards. They are an internal management system which is implemented by many producers so as to control the population of pests. Integrated pest management is important because it allows producers to monitor the population of pests by using a bundle of knowledge and practices and technologies, and to minimize the use of pesticides. As a result, IPM improves the quality of the product because the product has less pesticides. But in contrast to standards, it is less visible to external stakeholders. So when you buy the apple from the supermarket, you don't know, it doesn't have a logo there saying this has been produced in a farm that adheres to integrated pest management systems. And here, this leads me to our problem. Our problem is that producers are faced with multiple food standards. So we have seen, and this is not the case only in agricultural production. In general, firms, they face with with a huge proliferation of standards. And we don't know, again, not only in agricultural production, we don't know what is the effect of these standards upon the performance of firms. So here I have the logos of the standards that it is related to our research context, the apple industry in South Africa. So farmers are asked to comply with Global GAP. This is an international standard which for GAP stands for Good Agricultural Practices. Maybe you have seen that in products in some retailers. LEAF is another international standard which ensures environmental and responsible practices. Fair trade is, refers mainly to the ethical practices of the business. CISA is a national, is the South Africa Sustainability Initiative. BRC is the British Research Consortium of Retailers. And the bottom ones are private standards. Is a Nurture, Tesco, a retailer in the UK, Marks & Spencer, Field to Fork, another private retailer in the UK, and Albert Heijn, which is a retailer in the Netherlands. So farmers, they face with all the standards, and we don't really know whether by adopting these standards, they are improving their export performance. Is this important? Yes, it is. Because at the same time that we need to ensure that farmers are sustainable, they need to be sustainable on, with regards to their environmental sustainability, social sustainability, but also their economic sustainability. Because if they are not economically sustainable, they are going to exit the market. They will cease to exist. So we need to know this. And at the same time, we need to know what IPM plays in all this. So just to tell you from the start, the methodology we used, it was both quantitative and qualitative. So we use inductive thinking. Therefore, we started with standards, and then through the interviews and the discussions, we discover IPM. So So there is a background, inductive and deductive thinking, because we use this mixed methodology, has this back and forth, and therefore we had to understand the role of IPM. So we started with many questions. Please feel free to share your views. We wanted to understand why firms adopt multiple standards. Do they do it because of regulations, or do they do it because they want to give a signal to the buyers? And what is the relationship with multiple food standards and export performance? And what is the role of integrated pest management systems? Do they play a relationship between multiple food standards and export performance? So I will move now to our literature theoretical framework. Some of these issues you might be acquainted, some others they might be new. Our focus, I said, we focus on performance, but we mainly focus on export performance. And this is because our research context is South Africa. So this is an upper middle income developing economy where producers seek to export their products because they want to increase their profits, and prices in advanced economies are much higher than prices in South Africa. Now, when they export into markets in advanced economies, to do so, what we call it as export entry, is difficult for these firms, not only because of imports that they are imposed on all products, but also because of non-tariff barriers, which are related to the increasing regulatory restrictions that both national and international governments impose to agricultural products, but also private retailers. And of course, these restrictions and the regulations are important because they want to ensure that this food is safe and of high quality for the consumers. And here is where the role of food standards comes in. So food standards are really important because they allow consumers to to ensure the buyers in export markets that their product is of high quality and safe. And the previous literature, there is a huge literature about standards and about food standards, which indicates that there are gains from food standards. This was the case of Kenyan farmers, as well as Chilean raspberry farmers, Peruvian asparagus exporters. So by adopting these standards, so most of these previous studies is about adopting one standard, not many. Producers are able to benefit by integrating in international supply chains, increasing their reputation, and improving their performance. However, we look at multiple food standards because nowadays it's not enough to just have one standard. And adopting standards, we do know that it is very costly. Certification fees are very high. We use the signaling theory to understand why firms adopt standards. So signaling theory was introduced by Spence in order to understand labor markets. So in a very simple terms, what Spence argued is that there is an information asymmetry between employers, or let's say hiring committees, and application candidates. In what happens is that employers, they don't know the true capabilities of prospective employees. So there is this asymmetry of information, and the degrees, advanced degrees or prestigious degrees, give a signal to the employer that this employee is of higher capability. So signals convey an information which we are not able to observe. We don't know the intrinsic quality or capability of employees, and resolves market failures. In our case, allows buyers and customers to make decisions. Food standards what we argue in this paper, in our theoretical approach, is that they serve as a market signal because buyers, let's say supermarket and final consumers, they want to know, are the producers in South Africa reducing greenhouse emissions? What are they doing with their water? Are they exploiting their workers? Are they respecting suppliers, etc.? So food standards are credible because they are certified by an external party. So they are able to resolve this information asymmetry. So this is the previous literature, and here we argue that this is incomplete because what we know from the previous literature is that standards increase performance, but this is the case of one standard, or let's say two standards. We don't know what happens when firms adopt multiple standards. So we just published with Nicole and some other co-authors a paper which looks at multiple standards across all industries. And we found out that, yes, they convey a stronger signal, but their impact upon performance is not linear. So initially improves performance, but after a threshold, if you adopt more and more standards, your performance is going to decline. So this leads us to believe that firms may be also facing some negative effects when they adopt multiple standards related to the increasing cost. So when we are trying to understand this relationship in the context of agricultural products and the adoption of multiple food standards, we argue that firms that adopt multiple food standards are able to send a stronger signal to the markets, and this allows them to enter different markets, to export in different international markets because different countries have different regulations. However, at the same time, they face a higher actual production cost. And so we started having a very positive view about standards, but then we ended up thinking that actually they might not be able to increase the exports we started having some doubts of firms. So we looked further into what other factors determine product quality, and we realized that the quality of agricultural products is really complex. It is determined by many factors. Some of these factors consumers can observe, such as the size, the color of the apples you buy, and the variety. You say, okay, I want this variety, or whether there are defects or not. So these are observable characteristics that consumers can detect before purchase. So no problem with these characteristics. There is perfect information. However, agricultural products have some characteristics that they are unobservable. This refers, for example, to taste or the health effects, which are determined by pesticides, or the environmental and social effects. So these characteristics you cannot observe. There is an imperfect information when it comes, for example, to taste. So consumers are able to experience taste only after they purchase this good. The big problem lies when there are characteristics that consumers cannot observe even after purchase. And this is the case with the health effects of agricultural products, the environmental and social effects. So here is where our problem lies. We have an information asymmetry that consumers, they don't know anything about what's the level of pesticides in this apple. Has this apple produced by a farm that is environmental and socially responsible? Standards resolve partly this problem when it comes to environmental and social responsibility, but not when it comes to the health effects of the apples. And here is where we think the role of integrated pest management lies. But at the same time, we notice that the signaling theory is not able because it focuses only on external perceptions, is not able to allow us to understand the role of integrated pest management. And here we use a complementary theoretical insight from the resource-based view of the firm. So this theory simply says that the competitiveness of firm is determined by the internal capabilities of the firms. So firms that they have higher capabilities are able to perform better. So we believe that integrated pest management is able to increase the capabilities of the firms because the firms build knowledge of different types of practices that they are tacit and difficult to imitate. So the other firms, they cannot say, this is what you do and what you don't do, because it's very complex. You need many different types of knowledge, and I will mention some of the practices in a while. So integrated pest management then system is able to benefit the producer because it increases the quality of the products by using less pesticides, but at the same time reduces their costs and increases the health benefits from these cleaner products. So our theoretical framework is here. We argue that integrated pest management system moderate the impact of food standards upon exporting because it improves the quality of the products by reducing pesticides level. It may reduce the taste. At the same time, it's good for the producer. It reduces production costs because it reduces pesticides. So what we argue is that firms use strong signals, that's multiple food standards, to communicate their internal unique resources, that it is their knowledge of a huge variety of integrated pest management practices that they implement. Okay, I will move now into the methodology. So here we started by, our intention was to do a quantitative study based on a survey or a new survey we designed for this research. But at the same time, we realized that while we were interacting with the biologists, co-investigators, and the biologist, a postdoctoral researcher was communicating with the economist postdoctoral researcher, we realized that this method won't give us the full answer to resolve our, to answer the key research question. So we use a mixed method study, which implies that besides the quantitative part, which is a survey based on 150 producers, we use also interviews. So the survey, we conducted it in 2 field trips in 2018 and 2019. The response rate was quite high, approximately 60%, but the sample was quite small, 89%. The semi-structured interviews were quite rich, were 34, and they were conducted with technical or production managers, but also key industry players and sector and distributors. Okay, I will move now to discuss our case and some of the findings. So, as I said, the context is South Africa, an upper middle income developing economy, which includes, is a very key player along with New Zealand and Chile in the exporting of apples. It includes the industry 600 producers, which are mainly located, as you can see, in in the Western Cape, what is called the floristic region. So over there, you have a concentration of the largest amount of apple producers. We focus on 6 areas, which we have categorized them in 3 three regions due to their geographic proximity. So these regions, Elgin, Grabau, and then Vinboon, Villiers, Drop, and Greyton and Caledon account for 40% of the production of apples in South Africa. So we'll move now into our measures. That's the survey, the quantitative part of the analysis. So what we want to explain is the growth of exports. We measure exports through typically through the difference between the production of high quality class apples 1 and 2 in the difference between year 2018 and 2017, and then we divide that with the production of high quality exportable apples in 2017, and then we take the logarithmic format. So here we have our key independent variable, the explanatory variable, which is the focus of our study, the food standards, where to understand to measure whether firms they have adopt multiple food standards. What we did is we just created an aggregate score of the total number of food standards that a firm adopts. Some of these standards, such as Global GAP and CISA, are adopted by all farms. So it wouldn't make any sense to include them in the score. And some others, you see at the bottom, again, we have discarded them, and we remove them because only a negligible percentage of firms, they have adopted them. So here, our food standard score would be a variable that takes the value of 0 if a firm doesn't adopt any standard, and a maximum value of 6 if they adopt all of them. So in this table, you see the distribution of food standards score. 0, in fact, is 2, right? Because all of them adopt the Global GAP and CISA. 24% of the firms fall into this category. Then we see that the majority of firms, 47%, they adopt only 1 on top of Global GAP and CISA. 20%, a smaller amount of firms adopt 2. Again, in total is 4. And a smaller amount of firms adopt 6%, and 3% they adopt a larger amount of food standards. We are moving now to the other key variable, exploratory variable, that's the integrated pest management score. To create this, we worked closely with the biologists so as to understand all these practices. So these are all the practices that the producers are using to control, to inspect, to monitor and control the growth of pests in their crops. Again, we remove the first practice because the universe of the firms, they have adopted it. And this is this table, you see the distribution of integrated pest management score. We created it the same way as the score of the food standard score. And you see that the distribution is skewed, which this means that our producers are quite wise. A large percentage of them are adopting many of these practices. So 28% of them, they are adopting 9 practices, 23% of them have adopted 11 practices. So again, these are invisible practices to external stakeholders, but widely diffused among the producers. So in our quantitative analysis, we control, of course, for the size of the firms, typically small firms, they have less resources. We control for ownership, again, typically firms that they belong in national or international groups, or firms that they are part of a cooperative. They have more knowledge, more information, more resources compared to individual firms. And we also control for Black Economic Empowerment Program. This was a government incentive program that included some of the producers. And we also take into consideration the location of the farms due to different climate and soil conditions. These are the descriptive statistics of our key variables. You see that the mean of the export growth is negative, which implies that on average, exports have been declining during this period. This doesn't mean that some of the farms did not experience a growth. You see that the maximum value is 25. What it means is that the majority of them, they didn't experience an increase in their exports. And this is partly explained because those years, South Africa suffered from a drought. So they struggled to produce these high quality apples for export markets. The food standard score, the mean is 1.2. Again, this is for the real mean is 3, if we consider that all of them have adopted the other standards. And whereas the mean of integrated pest management score is much higher, 9. So again, it is an indication that this IPM practice is widely diffused among our firms. And we see from the size control variable that 77% of the firms are small. Ownership, 46% of the firms are owned by an individual producer. And age, that's interesting. The average age is 47 years. So these are established producers that they know what they are doing, and the majority of them are participating in international markets. Here I have the correlation matrix. Sorry, you cannot see, it's very small, just to check whether there is any multicollinearity between our key explanatory variables. And I would proceed with the next attempt to understand this data. So we did this Venn diagram because we wanted to understand the relationship between the food standards. We could understand what are they doing, why they are adopting this standard and that standard, what's the logic. So we see here that there is an overlap between their adoption of multiple standards. For example, if you look at the green standard, field to fork, that's a premium supermarket in the UK, Marks and Spencer. So we have 5 of these firms that they adopt field to fork, but also they have Global Cap and CISA. If you see the overlap with the yellow, the green and yellow, we see these 2 firms, they adopt field to fork and the British Retail Consortium standard. And if you see the overlap with, with blue, the green and blue, we see that 3 of these firms, they adopt not only field to fork, but also Alberheim, which indicates that they are trying to export to the UK market. They have good relationship with a specific retailer, but also they are trying to export into the Dutch market, the Netherlands, and for that they need an additional standard. Next, we have the econometric analysis, which from a sample of 89 firms, we dropped to 66 firms. And this is because not all of the farmers wanted to reveal their exports, despite the fact that we ensured them that this is, anonymous. So this analysis is difficult to produce robust results because of the fact that we have a small sample and huge standard errors. So, but still, we attempted so as to have an insight of what is going on between multiple food standards and the growth of exports. So in the first column, we include typically only the control variables. Then in the second column, we include the integrated pest management, we see that the coefficient is positive, which indicates that adopting a comprehensive system of integrated pest management practices will have a positive impact upon export growth, but the coefficient is not statistically significant. So, no evidence that there is any impact. Next, in column 3, we include the independent effect only of multiple food standards. These are standardized scores. And we see that the coefficient is negative, indicated that the more standards I adopt, the lower will be my export performance. But again, the coefficient is not statistically significant, so we conclude there is not effect. In column 4, we include both the effect of food standards and integrated pest management. The signs of the coefficients are consistent, positive for IPM, negative for food standards. And then in the final column, we include the interaction effect between food standards and IPM, because we want to see whether the effect of food standards is contingent, it depends on the level of IPM. And here the interaction effect seems to be positive again and statistically significant. But of course, we need to be very cautious with these results, because as I said again, they large errors may affect the robustness of the results. So I'm moving now to the qualitative findings. So our interviews with the farmers, with the 34 respondents, try to give us insights of why do they adopt food standards, and is there any relationship between food standards and the performance of the firm? Are they helping them? And so the first farmer 6, it was quite a cynic. He said, oh, by the way, they call them labels or eco-labels. So this farmer says that these labels are only for window dressing. And he or she doesn't find any additional benefits. Next farmer raised an important issue about access to markets and reputational effects. So they said that failing to comply with one of these standards, they were referring to the private standards by the supermarkets, not the mandatory standards. These are voluntary standards. The agreement with the supermarket will freeze, and there will be a huge reputational damage for the producer. And the final quote really enlightened us and gives an explanation also to what's really going on with this with competition in this market. Argue that standards, they do not help improve the product quality or the competitiveness of the firms, because all apple producers have them. So you cannot differentiate from each other. The next set of interviews focused on integrated pest management. We wanted to understand why they are adopting these comprehensive practices and whether there is any relationship with export performance. So the first farmer argued that IPM, the effects of IPM are not entirely visible, at least in the short term, the visibility. The next one, it makes an important point, is arguing that using less chemicals is the right thing to do, but also there is demand by the new generation in export markets. So I suppose it means for the young people, they are more aware when they are consuming fresh fruits. The next one is talking about cost. So it's arguing that by using IPM, they are able to reduce the production costs associated with energy and water use, and this increases their chances to export. And the final one is discussing about, again, the drivers of IPM. They say that actually are the middlemen, the distributors and the wholesalers, which they demand clean apples, meaning apples with less chemicals. And finally, we wanted to put all the puzzle together and understand how integrated pest management, what's the role of integrated pest management in this relationship between multiple food standards and exporting. The first of these interviews reveal, with Farmer 5 here, that if you do IPM, the farmer argues, you are able to tick some of the boxes of eco-labels, so potentially some synergies in practices. The next one is urging us, is a recommendation, a policy recommendation to create a logo for IPM in the package, which addresses the issue of invisibility we mentioned earlier, because IPM is promoting the sustainability and the protection of biodiversity. But external stakeholders, they have no idea about this. The next interview is important, again, to refer to the invisibility of IPM. It says that the public is less informed about IPM compared to eco-labels. And IPM lacks a mechanism that will make consumers aware of the benefits of IPM. And the final one, being in the School of Sustainability, is very clear. He said IPM is a scientifically good way to produce apples, full stop. But even if, and then he says that standards, actually, they don't have, they have adverse effects, meaning that most of them complain that they increases their cost, and there is a lot of bureaucracy and very little benefits. Okay, so which leads me to conclude. So I started this presentation with our problem. The problem is this proliferation of standards. And this proliferation of standards is you find it in all sectors. But here we look at the proliferation of food standards, and we ask an important question for the livelihood of producers in a developing economy, whether this affects their performance. And we don't find evidence to support that multiple food standards is actually improving export growth. What we did find, which was unexpected, was that integrated pest management enables firms that they have multiple food standards to increase their export growth. So what we argue is that integrated pest management and food standards are strategic fit resources. You need to have both of them if you want to be competitive in international markets. So with this study, we hope to contribute both to practice and theory. So we did a third trip to South Africa where we organized a workshop with the key stakeholders, and the key message we gave them, because of course they don't know what the others are doing, right? They don't know the export performance of their competitors, they don't know the practices. So what we told them is that keep doing IPM, because IPM, despite the fact that it's invisible, along with multiple food standards, is boosting your competitiveness. So in theory, what we will be telling the editors and reviewers is that we will contribute to theory, because we argue that two theoretical perspectives that they do not communicate, and we think that they should communicate to resolve this particular problem. So typically, signaling theory will focus on external perceptions to resolve information asymmetries. And resource-based view of the firm will focus internally on the micro firm and identify unique capabilities and resources to boost their competitiveness. So what we argue here is that these theories, they were complementary, because firms use signals, in our case, multiple food standards, to communicate their unique and tacit resources that it is the comprehensive IPM, which is invisible to external stakeholders. So I would like to thank you and also to invite you to share your questions, comments, concerns, suggestions on how we can improve this work.
Thank you, Effie. I think we have about 10 minutes for questions, and then we'll open it up for snacks in the back. Maybe I'll kick it off with a question, and then folks can raise their hand, and I'll bring the microphone. I was really struck on the slide with that amazing Venn diagram about how, from the way you were describing it, it sounded like some of these labels kind of give access to different export markets. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that, like to what extent stacking these labels is about accessing different markets, like selling to the UK versus the Netherlands, and is it about that, or is it about capturing more market share in like a more globalized market? Does that make sense? Just trying to understand the function of like one more label and if it's different depending on what label it is.
You are spot on. And we have more interviews that we do include here. So this is exactly what's happening. Farmers, they need to adopt the standards so as to access the market. But for example, they adopt a global gap because otherwise they cannot export. But this is not enough. So they adopt all these additional ones. Either the British Retail Consortium to access the British market, but still that's not enough. They might need to adopt a private standard by a particular supermarket. So it is access of national markets and access of small markets defined by powerful retailers. The expectation was that at some point, we also look at non-linearities by testing the square term of the multiple food standards score. At some point, these standards will allow them access, so they will improve their performance, but then the rest of the performance, we think performance benefits would come from the IPM, because the IPM is addressing the maximum residue limit, which is becoming stricter and stricter across markets and is not captured by food standards. But yes, food standards, if you don't have food standards, you cannot export. So yes.
Other questions?
Thank you. I guess I'm interested in, I mean, you said this was kind of inductive, that kind of you came across the IPM as something that was significant, but it seems like they're kind of separate. They're integrated, but they're kind of just separate decision processes almost. I mean, one, as you just mentioned now, that you need to avoid pesticide residue in your exports, otherwise you could have your shipment, you know, if it doesn't meet the kind of just national standards. So there's a definite, it would seem that there'd be a definite competitive push just to kind of reduce that load. And if it also reduces your expenses, that's always a plus. And then in a kind of separate domain, I don't know how much you got into what these different labels require, but it would, I'm sure there must be a lot of synergies in terms of, I mean, there's so many different practices, you know, from a menu of best practices, how well IPM, you know, fits with one or more of these standards. So there's kind of a, you know, just a synergy there that it's not strategic as much as saying, okay, if we're already doing this because we want to reduce our pesticide load, then, and it also happens to fit fair trades, you know, environmental regulations or whatever, then it just reduces a little bit of the cost of adopting that label. I mean, I guess I'm just kind of curious about the questions of putting these two issues together when they seem to be about, maybe I'm just missing the kind of how you theoretically you're linked, because it seems like a lot of practices are not externally signaled because the consumer doesn't know anything, is too technical, are not interested, and they hope that if it says it's an environmental standard, that best practices, which could be a wide range of things, are being adopted. So I guess I'm not being very clear about the question, but I'm just curious about linking these really in one study. They seem to be kind of separate decision processes in a sense.
No, thank you. We have struggled a lot with this as well, because what we were expecting is that some of the standards will include some of the integrated pest management practices, but not necessarily. Even the standards, they are not harmonized, and this is one of the complaints of the farmers. They are to some extent different, and they require different auditing processes. I think what it puts things together is when you look at this framework about the quality of the product. So I think a huge part of the quality and the competitiveness in markets of fresh fruits and vegetables, it has to do, if you go to an international organization, we will say that it has to do with observable characteristics. Apples need to be red, uniform, no defects, and so on. But this is not where the competitiveness lies. The competitiveness, when you are, of course, at this level, the high competitive countries, such as I mentioned, Chile, New Zealand, and South Africa, they compete on their unobservable characteristics mainly. So they need to adopt their standards to enter, to access, there you are, Brian, to access the market. But then competition, it seems also to be driven by these credence attributes, such as the health effects. So this is what we discover is happening in New Zealand, where the producers, they have transformed the whole production system, incorporating integrated pest management practices. So where everything comes together is with regard to the fact that there are huge information asymmetries, theoretically. Consumers and buyers, they cannot observe the environmental, sustainable, social, and health effects of the production. And that is where it comes the importance of standards. Standards improve the environmental and social effects, but not the health effects. This comes to IPM to a large extent, but there is no standard for IPM. So it is invisible, and what we argue is that firms may be strategically using, at least that's our conjecture, strategically using multiple food standards to signal something that is not actually visible. That's the fact that they have unique capabilities, unique productive systems of integrated pest management system that, along with high environmental and social sustainability, they also have health, positive health effects. I don't know if I convinced you.
Hi, thank you. That was wonderful and interesting. I was wondering if you could talk more about the overlaps or lack of overlaps in the standards. You said a lot of them are very incongruent, and I noticed up in the corner of your lovely Venn diagram that like the majority of them, 35, I think it was, just did the Tesco standard, but in terms of which ones they decide to adopt is really a matter of which ones they decide to go through the auditing process for, and not necessarily, like you might meet certain standards for one, but you don't bother with that one because that's just an extra audit that means nothing. Like, what is the relationship between how those standards overlap or don't overlap, and then which ones that the farmers decide that they're going to go through not necessarily the expense of implementing it, but if they already meet that, they're just not going to bother with the audit because like there's a few ISO ones that nobody ever did. Like what's the...
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, to be honest, I was also surprised. We didn't know what standards were adopting, which ones not. We had a huge list based on pilot interviews with the industry association, but also we discovered that, for example, none of them had an organic farm. They said that that's very difficult under those conditions. Regarding the CISA, which is the national one, a sustainability initiative of South Africa, so which is mandatory. So you need to have this standard. You cannot be a producer. And global cap, it has become mandatory. In order to export, you need to have global cap. So the whole sample of our farmers, they do have. Now, we didn't ask them explicitly. We don't know why they adopt, let's say, Leaf and Tesco, and why they don't adopt BRC and Field to Fork. We believe that, and some of the interviews indicate that this happens, that they want to access the market, but in order to collaborate with these high premium supermarkets, you need to have their standards. So they're supposed to be voluntary, but in practice they are mandatory. So it has to do with the strategies of the producer and their way of increasing the market share, even in the British economy. It doesn't seem to be so easy.
Fair trade's about fair wages, right? The human conditions within the supply chain, but these others focus on different things. So there's not perfect overlap. Getting back to Hallie's question, you know, how much are they complementary? There are some distinctions. My recollection is, Effie, we tried to slice this so many different ways earlier, looking at standards that were originated from nonprofit associations versus standards that were private labels and such. And we had a tough time shaking things out. What this conversation is communicating to me is, as we think about the paper, because we're still at the early stages of developing it, perhaps providing an image of all of the different attributes associated with these labels. So we know the Venn diagram associated with adoption, but maybe a Venn diagram associated with the requirements of the different labels could help illuminate what we're seeing here.
Yeah, this is very useful. Yeah, definitely we should do that.
Great. Well, with that, I think it's snack time. So I think through those doors, we have some light refreshments. If folks want to continue to chat with Effie or just kind of hang out, that would be great. Please stick around, and let's thank Effie one more time.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then just a quick reminder, we're doing back-to-back seminars this week and next week. So next week, Nathan Parker will be presenting, and that's sort of his tenure talk. So please come.